At the same time, the CSIR has joined forces with the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport in the development of COVID-19 response plans in a bid to improve public transport service delivery in the province. CSIR researchers conducted an investigation to understand the varying utilization of taxi ranks operated by associations in Gauteng. Dr. Mathetha Mokonyama is the Manager of Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR. He joins us now via Skype. A very good evening to him. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I was just listening to that interview my colleague had about the integrated systems and how this has been in the offing for the past year or so. I'd like to talk about COVID-19 and the dynamics that it has brought to the taxi transport system and integrating it. He was speaking about one ticket user for multiple modes of transportation. Do you feel that more now than ever as a safety precaution, its need, that is?
All right. Thanks, Tsepiso. Look, it's about time that the minibus taxi industry modernize. We've been talking about this since the late 80s. So a lot of the things that we talk about now, there's really nothing new. What is lacking is implementation. And more than ever, we need to move and implement these modernization concepts, programs, because it is becoming very expensive to operate a minibus taxi, and that is one of the biggest threats to the industry itself. That it is becoming so expensive to operate and to use the services. Just by way of example, if you can actually afford to use a taxi, you can actually afford to operate or use or get a car and use it. You may not be able to afford to buy the car, but in terms of the operating costs, you can actually afford to operate a car. So taxi cost, using a taxi is becoming the same. The cost of using a taxi is becoming the same as that of operating a car. So it is becoming expensive, and we need to find ways to modernize and create efficiencies in the system.
It's interesting that you say it's becoming expensive, and we look at the conflict between government and minibus taxis during this time because they wanted more money from the relief funds that government was, proposing for other industries. And you're saying it's becoming more expensive. It almost suggests that commuters could do better with other modes of transportation. I want you to talk to us about where the hidden costs are. Why is it so expensive? I mean, you've previously mapped out minibus taxi routes and subsidized bus routes. What have you found in there as a difference? Why does it cost so much more? Is it because buses are subsidized?
Yeah, on the issue of subsidy, subsidy as we see them, we have them now. They were just an apartheid, government program. So it was a financing scheme to implement apartheid. So we continue to have that, unfortunately. The subsidy that we need to, or scheme that we need to have, needs to be strategic. When you look at transport is an input cost to almost every sector. If you are buying labor, you are buying a component of transport. Now, it means that if you are trading internationally and you have an expensive transport system, you're becoming less and less competitive. So if you subsidize, and when you subsidize, it shouldn't be about the small things. It should be about how can we make the system a lot more efficient? How can we make our transport system a lot more efficient so that when we trade competitively? It's not about the interest of one mode of transport. or the taxi or a bus. It's really about making sure that the system, the cost of transport to society, is as minimal as possible, because in trade relations that is very important. Now,
about your thinking and what your findings are here, because, I mean, on the one hand, you've got government complaining that we've got too many vehicles on the road, and this is part of the reasons why we have a high vehicle accident rate, which in itself is a huge cost to the economy. Should we be paying more taxes for a better public transport system? And what do you see in your spatial visualization analysis?
Yes, we did quite a number of surveys, to get to understand, what is happening, in the industry, taxi industry, but also all other modes of transport. We're finding, for example, that, to break even, a taxi has to, transport something like 140 passengers a day. To just be above water, okay? That's equivalent to having 2 bus trips. So a taxi that does about 14 trips can be replaced by a bus that does just 2 trips. So where higher capacity vehicles like buses make sense, we need to use them, because it's not about a taxi, is about making sure that the network is as efficient as possible. In fact, one of our calculations show that we as society in South Africa, we pay about 5% more of GDP on transport, on mobility, than we should. So in terms of backlog, if you wanted to say what kind of backlog are we dealing with, we have about 5% of GDP extra on our transport costs as society. So whatever subsidy that we come up with, whatever financing of transport systems we come up with, must be about reducing that backlog. It's not about financing a mode of transport. It's about making sure that South Africa is competitive. So
let's talk about that backlog. The taxi recapitalization program has been called a failure by its critics. And I want you to talk to us about the tailored developmental solutions that you have perhaps proffered in line with this when you're talking about the broad public policy reform.
Yes, when the taxi recapitalization program was initiated a while back, it was very ambitious, and it needed a very strong program management capacity to implement. But unfortunately, over time, that capacity did not come through. And so the vision was diluted more and more. And what you're seeing now is a bit of a diluted, solution. It was not just about the vehicle; it was about the business itself. It was about reforming the industry, making it more sustainable, and a lot of things that we're talking about now about the value chain, the operators being part of the value chain. Those were part of that earlier program, but it has become very diluted, and it is not achieving what it was initially intended to achieve, and that actually becomes one of the threats going forward. Internal government capacity, especially at local government, capacity to implement. If at a municipal level, for example, you do not have that capacity, technical capacity to implement these programs, then we might as well forget about modernization, the programs that we talk about, because ultimately it will be local government mainly that is responsible for implementing all of these things.
A final question, and that is the dynamics around passenger travel patterns. What have you noticed, and has COVID-19 changed this?
Well, certainly, there are a number of surveys that were done to look at how, passenger patterns, travel patterns have changed. One thing we know is that the volume of passengers has declined quite drastically. A lot of passengers that are being transported, for example, are learners. Learners make a huge proportion of travelers generally, on buses especially. So that has declined. Certain sectors haven't opened, so generally, operators are making massive losses. If you actually manage to measure these losses across a number of modes, and it's quite substantial, and it will probably take quite a bit of time to recover. And where people have choices, for example, with the likes of Gautrain, we're seeing that individuals opt more to use their vehicles, their cars, and operators like Gautrain are likely to make quite significant losses going forward.
Thank you so much for speaking to us and your insights. Dr. Mathetha Mokonyama is the Manager of Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR.